Have you ever noticed that sometimes the greatest spiritual battles don't come from strangers? They come from people sitting at your own family table. People you love, people you grew up with, people you prayed for. And yet every time you leave their presence, your peace is gone. Your spirit feels heavy, and your walk with God becomes harder. The painful truth is this: not every relative is healthy for your spiritual life. The Bible is very clear about honoring family, but the Bible is also clear that protecting your spirit matters. There are some relatives who can slowly pull you away from God if you don't establish boundaries. And many believers are suffering today because they confuse access with love. Just because someone is family does not mean they should have unlimited access to your mind, your peace, your marriage, your calling, or your destiny. Even Jesus set boundaries. Even Jesus walked away from toxic conversations. Even Jesus refused to allow certain voices around him. So today, we're going to expose 6 relatives every believer should set boundaries with before their influence damages your spiritual life.
Number 1. The relative who mocks your faith. There are relatives who laugh at your prayer life. They mock your obedience to God. Every time you try to grow spiritually, they make sarcastic comments. You've changed too much. You think you're holy now? It's not that serious. At first, it sounds harmless, but over time, those words slowly attack your confidence in God. The enemy often uses ridicule to weaken believers. The Bible says in Psalm 1:1, "Blessed is the man who walks not in the counsel of the ungodly, nor stands in the path of sinners, nor sits in the seat of the scornful." Mockers are dangerous because they normalize unbelief. And if you stay around mocking voices too long, eventually you'll start hiding your devotion just to avoid criticism. Some believers stopped praying publicly because of mocking relatives. Some stopped serving God boldly because family members embarrassed them. But hear me, never let somebody shame you out of your relationship with God. Jesus himself was mocked. Noah was mocked while building the ark. David was mocked by his own brothers. Sometimes the people closest to you will understand your calling the least. Set boundaries. You do not need to argue with them constantly. You do not need to prove your spirituality. Protect your spirit and keep following God.
2. The relative who constantly brings drama and chaos. Every family has that person. Wherever they go, confusion follows. Arguments, gossip, manipulation, fighting, division. Every phone call becomes stress. Every gathering becomes tension. And somehow, they always pull everyone into emotional exhaustion. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 14:33, "For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace." Some believers don't realize that constant exposure to chaos affects your spiritual sensitivity. When your life is filled with unnecessary drama, it becomes difficult to hear God clearly. Your peace matters. Romans 16:17 says, "Mark those who cause divisions and offenses, and avoid them." Not everyone deserves unlimited emotional access to you. Some relatives only contact you when they want to spread negativity. They feed on conflict. They enjoy carrying stories from one family member to another. And if you're not careful, they'll pull you into bitterness you never intended to carry. You can love them without participating in their chaos. Sometimes boundaries sound like, "I don't want to discuss that. I'm staying out of this situation. I choose peace." And there is nothing unchristian about protecting your mental and spiritual peace.
3. The relative who tempts you back into sin. Because these relatives usually know your weaknesses, they know who you used to be. And every time you start growing spiritually, they try to pull you backward. Maybe they encourage drinking, maybe sexual immorality, maybe toxic partying, maybe dishonest business, maybe gossip, maybe anger. They constantly invite you into environments God delivered you from. And because they are family, many believers ignore the danger. But the Bible says in 1 Corinthians 15:33, "Do not be deceived. Evil company corrupts good habits." Sometimes corruption comes through familiar people. Some of you prayed for deliverance, and God delivered you. But the enemy keeps using relatives to reconnect you to your old life. Listen carefully. You cannot fully heal while constantly returning to the environment that wounded you. There are believers trying to grow spiritually while staying deeply connected to people who celebrate their destruction. That cannot work. Even Lot had to separate from Abraham's environment before destruction came to Sodom. Your salvation is too important to sacrifice for temporary acceptance. If certain relatives only influence you towards sin, compromise, or spiritual weakness, boundaries are necessary. Because eventually, whoever influences you repeatedly will shape your future.
4. The relative who is jealous of God's blessings on your life. Not everybody clapping for you is happy for you. And sadly, jealousy inside families is very real. Joseph experienced this with his own brothers. The Bible says in Genesis 37 verse 11, "And his brothers envied him." Some relatives become uncomfortable when God starts elevating you, when your marriage improves, when your finances improve, when your spiritual life grows, when doors begin opening. Instead of celebrating you, they compete with you. They minimize your achievements. They secretly resent your progress. They speak negatively about your success. And sometimes their jealousy becomes spiritual sabotage. Be careful around relatives who always make you feel guilty for growing. Some people only feel comfortable with you when you are struggling, like them. But once God starts blessing you, their attitude changes. This is why boundaries matter. Not everybody should know every detail about your life. Jesus himself did not reveal everything to everybody. Protect what God is building in your life, because jealousy can quietly become bitterness, and bitterness can become destruction. 5. The relative who drains you emotionally and spiritually. Some relatives only take. They never encourage, never uplift, never pray for you, never support you emotionally. But they constantly demand your energy. After every conversation, you feel exhausted. Some people are emotional consumers. They drain peace everywhere they go. And many believers feel guilty for creating distance because they're family. But even Jesus stepped away from crowds to rest. Mark 6:31 says, "Come aside by yourselves to a deserted place and rest a while." If Jesus protected his emotional strength, why don't believers think they should? Boundaries are not selfish. Boundaries are stewardship. You cannot pour endlessly into people while your own soul is dying. Some of you are spiritually exhausted because too many people have access to your emotions. You answer every call. You solve every crisis. You carry everybody's burdens. And now your prayer life is weak. Your peace is gone. Your joy has disappeared. Sometimes the most spiritual thing you can do is step back and recover. Not every problem is yours to carry. Learn this. Compassion does not mean unlimited access. You can love people deeply while still protecting your spirit. 6. The relative who pulls you away from God's purpose. This is the most dangerous one of all, because they may genuinely love you, but still distract you from your assignment. Not every loving voice is a godly voice. Some relatives pressure believers to abandon God's direction for worldly comfort. They discourage ministry. They discourage obedience. They discourage sacrifice. They want you to choose convenience over calling. Jesus experienced this too, In Matthew 16:23, when Peter spoke against Jesus fulfilling his purpose, Jesus responded strongly, "Get behind me, Satan. You are an offense to me." Peter loved Jesus, but in that moment, his words opposed God's will. Some relatives unknowingly become obstacles to your destiny. Every time God calls you higher, they try to pull you back into fear, doubt, and comfort. Be careful around voices that constantly weaken your obedience to God. Your purpose is too important. Your calling is too valuable. And sometimes, following God will require disappointing people who expected you to stay small. This is why Jesus said in Luke 14:26 that following him may even create division within families, because not everyone will understand the cost of obedience. But hear me clearly. Never let human relationships become greater than your relationship with God.
Family is a blessing from God, but boundaries are also biblical. This video is not teaching hatred, it's teaching wisdom. You can honor people without giving them control over your peace. You can love people without allowing them to destroy your spiritual growth. And you can forgive people while still creating healthy distance. Some of you have been suffering silently because you were taught that boundaries are unchristian. But God never called you to sacrifice your spiritual health just to keep everybody comfortable. Protect your peace. Protect your calling. Protect your walk with God. Because your soul is too valuable to place in the hands of toxic influence. If this message spoke to you today, type, "Lord, give me wisdom and discernment" in the comments. And if this video helped you, make sure you like this video, subscribe to Bible Drugs, and turn on notifications so you never miss the next message God may want you to hear. Stay close to God. And remember, not every open door should remain open forever unlocked.